Today we are going to sign in with Google, and specifically sign in with Google natively on an Android application that we're building with Expo React Native. Now, to do this, we're going to use this great open source library called react-native-google-signin, and I'm also very happy to say that Supabase is now a sponsor of this library, helping to support the collaborators and maintainers that make this happen, because this really makes native Google sign-in so easy on React Native applications. So please, if you can, also consider supporting this package if you're using it for your application. Now, the way we get started is there's a guide in here for Expo installation. So in a first step, let's go ahead and create our new Expo project. I like to use TypeScript, so we can use this Expo blank TypeScript template here. And then we can give it a name, and we're just going to call it Google Auth. There we go. And so now we're spinning up a new project. Great. And so now we can go into our Google Auth folder here, and I like to use VS Code. So let's open this up in VS Code here. And we can see, so we can run this with our npm run start, for example, npm run Android. So maybe let's quickly do this, npm run Android. And so now we're going to spin this up on here, the Google Pixel simulator. Okay, great. So here we have our project. So we can open this up. Maybe let's do this side by side. And then we can say sign in with Google. That's what we're going to do later on here. Give that a save, and we can see, okay, that is all set up. So let's stop this server for now, because what we need to do is we need to install this React Native Google Sign-in library here. So we can do that with our npx expo install. And while that is installing, we also need to configure our config plugins in our app.json. So in here, we will add this plugins, and then we'll add the React Native Google Sign-in plugin there. Okay, and then the important thing is we'll step through this Android guide here in a second, but because this is using kind of native code that's not built into Expo Go, in order to do this, we actually need to run build and run our Android app kind of outside of Expo Go. And so what we can do is we can do this here with this command, npx expo run Android. So let's copy that over. And so you can see now that we're going to build kind of this Android package name here. Let's specify, so it should be a reverse URL. My website is thor.bio, so let's just say bio.thor.expo test. Let's call it that. And so you can see now we have our package name added here for Android. And then also we are getting the Android directory here, so we can configure kind of any sort of build.gradle files that we need to configure later. So the first time you're running this will take a little while. So in the meantime, what we can do is we can dive into the Android guide here. So if you're using Firebase, you will need to kind of set up the configuration there, but we're not using Firebase. We're using the open source Firebase alternative called Supabase. So if you're not using Firebase, we can follow this start integrating Google Sign-in into your Android app guide here. So let's have a look at that. Yes, so we'll kind of have done all the setup already. So we'll need to check that in our build.gradle file. So that's in here, build.gradle, we have these repositories. So we can see now our application has finished building, and we actually have it running now as well, the local build that we've done. So here, repositories, we need that Google repository. Okay, we already have that in there. That's great. And then what we'll also need in our app level build.gradle, so within Android app, and then there's another build.gradle here. We will need dependencies, this Google Play Services Auth dependency here. So if we go into this and search for dependencies, and then we'll just add that at the bottom of our dependencies, maybe here. We'll do this. Okay. And then we'll lastly need to configure our Google API console project kind of OAuth things. But for now, let's actually go ahead and have a look at kind of the React Native implementation side of things. And then we'll come back to setting up the auth kind of configuration with Google. Okay, so here we can look at this. We have this Google sign-in. So we can just copy this out here. And what I'll do is I'll just create a new file. So within a components folder, I'm going to create this auth.tsx component. And so that's where I'm going to implement my Google sign-in button. So yeah, we'll just load the Google sign-in button here from the library, and then we'll export default function, and the function is then just going to return our Google button. So we'll need some configuration here as well, so we can copy this and kind of look at all the different things we'll need. So here we have scope. So if we want to access, Drive, for example, read only. So we want to read from the user's drive with the access token. We can do that. And then lastly, we'll need the Web Client ID to actually get the ID token returned. And the ID token is what we need to then complete the sign-in with Supabase Auth. So yeah, these are kind of the only two pieces that we'll need. And so we can comment this one out before. We'll just give it a try, see kind of what happens, and then later we come back and complete the setup here once we have the client ID created. And then yes, so there's the sign-in code, but let's look at first of all the button. So this is the Google sign-in button. So we want to return this. So we'll return our Google sign-in button. We'll not going to implement the disabled state for now, and then here we'll just do an inline function with the sign-in behavior. So that was here. So it's an async method. We can just copy kind of the function for now. And then we're not going to set the state. We're just going to console log the user info. Let's JSON.stringify that. User info null 2. So we're just doing that to have like a nicer print. So here with the 2, we can kind of do an index, tab index of the string. We'll just give the error as any here, and then we can implement kind of the different error messages. Yeah, let's start with that and kind of see what happens. So we'll give that a save, and then in our app.tsx, so underneath here, we'll just get in our auth component from components auth. There we have it. And so now we have the Google sign in with Google button here. Okay, so this is just the visual here. We still need to step through and finish the configuration in our Google project. So we'll, this part here, we need to open our project in the Google API console. So that's the step here. If you go back here, follow the start integrating Google sign in into your Android app. And we'll need to configure this. We'll need to get our SHA-1 certificate. So that piece, the configuration, is actually a little bit challenging. So you can see kind of here authenticating your client. You can read out kind of how to do this. So we'll need to get the key store SHA-1 certificate. So let's just go in here. So I've created this Expo Google sign-in test. Let me actually do this from scratch and create a new project. We'll call it Google Auth test, just to kind of step through this end to end. Okay, so now we go into our Google Auth test. So here we are. And then in APIs and services, we have, so if you look in here, OAuth consent screen. So that's in APIs and services, then OAuth consent screen. We want an external, so available to any test user with a Google account. Let's create that. We'll just say Expo Google Auth test. We'll just select my email here. We don't need to configure that. We'll just use my Thor@Supabase email here as well. And then we can save this. And so we've now got this created, and now we need to set up the credentials. And so first of all, we need to create the OAuth client ID credentials here. And we will say, so Android is the application type, Android client, we need the package name. So if you remember in our app.json, so this is our Android here package name that we set up earlier. So we'll put in the package name here. And then, yes, now we need our SHA-1 certificate fingerprint. So we can copy this command here. Let's stop this for now. And so if we do this here, the key tool, we need the path to our key store. And so this will be in the Android directory within app. And then you can see we have the debug key store. So that's our directory. And then we can fire this off. And in debug mode, the default password is Android. That's also in the docs here. If you read the docs here, it should say somewhere, yeah, the password for the debug key store is Android. And so now we just copy out here the SHA-1 certificate fingerprint. So we'll copy out this one, go back here, set that up. And so now we can create this. And so here now we get the client ID. And if we look back, so once we have our client ID, we know we need to go into the project strings.xml file. So we can do a command P here to search through our files, strings.xml here. And then we can copy this one here. So we'll need to add that in here. And then our client ID, we'll just copy this client ID here, give that a save. Okay, so we got that saved. And so now when we rebuild the application, npx expo run Android, opening up the application here. And so now when we do sign in with Google, you see now that we've set this up correctly. Well, we see access blocked, has not completed the Google verification process. So yes, access denied. Okay, there was some more configuration. Yes, we need to add test users. So here in our APIs and services OAuth consent screen, we need to add users, and we'll just say, okay, so now that we have our test user set up, okay, let's try this again. Sign in with Google. So we have our test user configured now. Okay, being tested. Yeah, we're fine with that. It's currently only being tested. And so now here we have our scopes. We can see that. And then we can continue. And so now what you can see is we do get our user info object. So if we go back to our auth component here, you can see we get this user info object here, but we don't have an ID token. So we get some information about the user, but we also need this ID token. And so in order to get the ID token, if you remember here, you saw this earlier by the configuration. It is a little bit confusing, but yes, in order to get the ID token, we need to set this Web Client ID. And so the way we can create this here, Web Client ID, you can see is back again in our API and services, credentials. So we've created our Android client, and now we need to create a new OAuth client ID. And so now we need this web application here, web client. We don't need to specify this because it's coming from our native application. And so here now we have a client ID for our web client. And so we copy this one out and we go back to our auth. And here in the configuration now we set up this web client ID. Here, give that a save. Just, yes, rerun the build step. Yeah, luckily, once you've kind of built it initially, that step is quite quick. And so now when we play this through again, so now the consent screen doesn't pop up anymore because we've done this already. But so now we're getting our ID token. And again, very similar, you know, if you've done the Apple sign in with Apple before, this ID token is just a JWT. So we can put that into our jwt.io. And so we now see here, and so this is kind of the important part here, which Supabase Auth will verify, is this AUD audience credential. So that's what we'll need to configure. And this, if you remember, this is the web client ID here that we set up. So that's encoded in our JWT. And so that's what we'll need to tell the Supabase Auth server. So let's go ahead and initialize Supabase in here. So using the Supabase CLI, we can say Supabase init. We don't need a VS Code workspace. And so now we have our Supabase credentials, the config.toml. And what we can look at is, I believe, the Google Auth. Yeah, that's our project ID. And then we can do like auth external. And in this case, we want Google. We say enabled true. And then also we want this client ID And again, so that is the client ID, our web client ID. So we can copy it from here, or from your console there. So this is the same. This is the client ID we need to set up. And then we don't need any secrets or anything for this here. Also don't need the URL. So if you're only doing kind of the native Google Auth and not the Google OAuth on the web, for example, we really just need the client ID for our auth external.google. And then, yes, so now we can implement this with Supabase.js. So in order to use Supabase.js, let's have a look at the docs. We'll look at, so for React Native, we can use the normal JavaScript client library. We'll just need to, so React Native options with async storage. So let's create a new utils folder. Let's make this smaller here. Let's say new file utils/supabase.js ts. We're working with TypeScript. And then let's copy this one out here. And then we'll need to install a couple dependencies. So we can say npx expo install. And so the only difference with like npx expo install versus like npm install is that for libraries where there's a specific version required for Expo, it then installs the appropriate library for, that specifically works with your specific Expo version, I believe, something like that. So we can just paste all these in here, and we're installing, so you can see just one, and I think this is the async storage. It's installing kind of a specific SDK related version, and the other modules are just then normally installed via npm. And then what we can say here, so if we run Supabase start, we then get our login. We do need to specify the auth external Google secret. I believe that's a limitation currently that we're going to fix, because we don't actually need the secret for the Google Auth. So we'll just replace this with just a dummy kind of secret for now. And then I think we can Supabase start it up. Yeah, there we have it. So we can now set up our Supabase client. So the API is just running here on localhost, this one, and then we just need our public anon key. Remember, for React Native clients, only put the public anon key in there. The service role key should never be exposed. And then we want to export this const so we can use it throughout. There we have it. And then one thing I really love about using Supabase locally, we get our fully fledged studio here running on localhost. And so we also have auth here. And then when everything is configured correctly, we can just see the user pop up in there. And so basically now what we need to do is we need to implement our Supabase Auth signInWithIdToken, and then just pass in that ID token. So we'll say import from, we'll just go util/Supabase, and so we'll just importing Supabase here. And then here after our console log, we'll do await supabase.auth.signInWithIdToken. Yes, exactly, that's what we want. And then we want our provider to be Google, and we want our ID token. This would be here this ID token, and that would be our user info dot ID token. And in our case, we'll just, if we don't have an ID token, we just pass it in, and then we'll get an error. Ideally we check. Let's do this properly. We will check if user info dot ID token, then we do this, and then we'll have an else. We can throw new error and say no ID token present. Okay, great. And then here, this will give back data and an error, or either data or an error. And then we can just console log. Let's do like this, error, data. There we have it, and that should be pretty much it. We have a native module. Yeah, so I think we need to just rebuild this after the installation. We need to properly rebuild because it's a kind of native dependency module. Okay, there we are. And then sign in with Google, and we have yes, network request failure. I think I remember there was something. If you React Native Android local host. Yeah, I think that is this one here. We need a mapping port. Run the following command in your terminal. Map your local port to the mobile port. Access your development server this way. Okay, so I think if I read this correctly, we should be able to do and so we're running on localhost 54321. So we should just say 54321 and map that to 54321. Let's do that. Let's give that a retry. Restart our Expo. Yeah, I think on the iOS simulator that kind of works out of the box, but then with the Android simulator, looks like we have some extra steps. Obviously, if you're using kind of a Supabase hosted Supabase project, that shouldn't be an issue. Yep, and there we have it. So now we can see, maybe we can make this a bit bigger here. So the error is null, and we have a session, we have an access token. And so now if we actually go back to our studio, reload this here, we can see now that my account is created in Supabase Auth. We got Google here. So basically now, if we wanted to go to our hosted Supabase project and wanted to configure this here with our hosted project, we can then go to Auth providers and Google. And then again here, we'll need to set up the client ID. Here, we need to set up the authorized client IDs. And that is, yeah, our client ID from here. And then we can get it working with our hosted Supabase project as well. So there you have it. This is how you can implement the native Google sign-in into your React Native Android projects. Now the configuration is a little bit more involved here, so I hope this was useful for you. And let me know in the comments what else you'd like to learn about, and see you next time.